I think between bench, squat, and deadlift, bench is the most like bodybuilding. You're going to get bigger arms, chest, and shoulders and back and get a bigger bench.
Well, technically,
squatting's like half and half. It's like
technically,
bigger legs.
Yeah, what are you teaching them with the technique though?
For the technique, what I'm getting at there is your technique just needs to be efficient so that you can handle a lot of volume.
Okay.
Is kind of what I was getting at with that. What I described earlier, like with the bar path, I do think there's plenty of different ways that you could bench, because if you have a different disparity of chest, front delt, or tricep strength from one person to the next, different builds. Some people retract their shoulders straight back. Some people retract and pull down or depress. Other people kind of shrug a little bit more. And so there's a lot of ways that you can bench. But I think the common thing that I see, and this is probably from people who read the internet, and they're like, oh, I should bring the bar low on my chest to shorten the range of motion. So if I bring it even lower, it'll be even better. And so the most common fault is bringing the bar too low and then pressing it too low. When I say too low, I mean like over your lower chest or over your upper abs. When you see people thrust the hips off the bench, I think that's most commonly because you have the bar going too low and you're trying to sort of like tilt it back over your chest where you have more leverage. So I think that's a really big one. I'll ask, do you feel chest soreness when you bench? Usually as sort of like a follow-up question if I think they're probably kind of taking the bar path too low. So that's a big one for me. It's like your bench has to be, it's got to be efficient. You got to be tight, but you need to make sure you're strengthening your chest. If you're not strengthening your chest, that's not the end of the world, because it could be that then you need to use a second bench exercise to build up the volume that better hits your chest, like incline maybe. Or for some people, if the bar path is too low, then, fixing it with like a feet up bench, like the Larson press is kind of popular, but for a good reason, because if you touch the bar too low and then you thrust your hips to kind of fix the bar path and take your feet out, you're going to stop bringing the bar too low, because you're going to get that negative feedback pretty quick. And then you'll feel, okay, my chest is doing the work more, because my chest is actually getting loaded on the lowering phase and not, just at the last second as I'm trying to, so yeah, I think that's kind of I don't know. It's just, there's little mistakes that are typically taking the chest out of the lift, I think. Now, of course, you can use too much chest, but most of the people that I see, they have an idea like of getting tight. And usually that means they wind up using kind of too low of a bar placement. Another sort of thought with the, the shortest path is the best. I'm sure everyone listening to this probably heard of Julius Maddox. He's like the strongest bencher in the world. When he benched at our Boss of Bosses, he lifted on one of we got the elite bench. Now, he's the only person I've ever seen put the bench up to number 7 as far as the height, and he's benched the most weight of anybody ever. So the range of motion is the greatest on his. And the other thing that you'll see on a lot of guys who are really big benchers, they'll actually sink the bar in their chest. And so you'd say, well, that's more range of motion. How could that be better? And you watch them, you're like, oh, it's obviously good. But the trick there again is how much strength do you have at your chest? That's kind of determined by what's the muscle length of your pecs, your triceps at that position. Well, if you're massive and when your triceps and chest are stretched further, there's a point where stretching will kind of increase tension more exponentially. So the passive tension of the muscle that's really big increases a lot. And that's where that deeper position gets a higher tension on those muscles. And so the trade-off of going further is outweighed by the speed that you can develop from the more forceful contraction. Yeah, and that's not to say that there isn't like a technique to it too, because obviously you need to be solid on the bench. So once you do drive it up, you're staying in contact with the bench and you're putting it in a position where you're stable enough to like push through the lockout. So when I watched Julius, I was just like, man, this guy looks like he could press any weight off his chest. The question is, can he stabilize it at the lockout, or is it going to just kind of, and then, when he benched at Army, he benched 738. And it was like, again, the speed was there, but it was just like the lockout was a little bit rocky.
Mm-hmm.
It was solid, but it was like, you could just tell like that was the limiting factor, not the weight on the chest.
Yeah.
And then like we worked out together one year at the, I think the Olympia, and I had just done like a deadlift workout, and we go to work out together, and we're doing a bunch of rows, and like I'm pretty strong, but I was kind of matching him on the rows, and I was thinking, okay, I feel like he should be able to do more than me on this stuff. But I mean, his bench just kept getting stronger. And the thing that you could see is that, you know, he would get it where it's like the lockout got more predictable and more solid. So then you can't really utilize your triceps if your shoulders are kind of swimming.
Yeah.
You know, you got to be able to have one solid object to push against before you can, you know, push that weight out. So that was you know, that's something I will also emphasize with the bench. Like if you struggle with the lockout, I think a lot of times it's not a limitation of just pure tricep strength, but more like, is your form good enough where your shoulders are staying locked in place when you go to actually lock the bar out?
Or the lats strong enough to stabilize
it. Yeah, certainly the lats are, that's kind of that critical muscle. Most of the guys who I've seen who are, you know, kind of middleweights who bench like a ton, their lats are always totally jacked. It's
they're important,
you know. Yeah,
kind of important for all three of the lifts. When it comes to the
never train your lats too much.
Yeah, with the deadlift, how do you go about coaching that?
That I would say all different ways. I think the deadlift is interesting in the sense that, well, like I said, benching I would say is like 90% getting bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Squatting is like half and half. You need bigger legs, that's half bodybuilding, and you need a stronger back and technique, which is not requiring that you're just huge. You know, how you lock in your upper body can be dramatically better without gaining a lot of weight. So there's a sort of like a very big skill component to it. But I think deadlift is the most dependent on like skill. And the reason I say that is you could sort of simplify your form and just keep your back locked in like a, you know, neutral or extended position. But then the reality is you're basically just doing a half squat. You're squatting the weight up. So if you're good at that, great. But if you want to lift more, all the best lifters, they pull with their backs rounded. And so in a squat, you could think of it as a compound lift where you are really loading your knees, your hips, and your back, but your back's not articulating. It's staying locked. So that's only a limited number of joints. But in a deadlift, you're loading your knees and your hips, but then you've got, you know, 5 lumbar vertebrae that can be in articulated different positions. You got the 12 thoracic vertebrae. So you have many, many more joints that you could articulate. And if you can do it with mastery, you can increase your leverages really, really dramatically. So you can get a lot of strength on your deadlifts without just getting bigger. So that leads me to my thought of like, okay, well now you need to learn how to kind of consistently put your back in the best position. The way that I sort of think of it is your knees need to kind of be over the bar so that you have the quads loaded to a degree. Some people a little bit more or less. Whether you pull sumo or conventional, your hips need to be kind of forward to the point where like your knees are over the bar. In order to get in the best position though, if your spine is like extended, you know, like a squat, well, that makes your spine effectively like longer. So the position that you can move your hips into is either going to have to be farther back or lower. And therefore lower means you're basically squatting the weight up. Farther back means more loading on your lower back. And so to me, you want your hips to be able to move forward and above the bar more. And therefore, you know, your shoulders have to be exactly the length of your arm above the bar. You can't change your arm length. So therefore the spine has to conform to kind of link those two positions. So it's a very complex version. If you said that to a beginner, it's like, the first thing they're going to do is probably hurt their back. So you've got to,
well, there's bracing involved with this too.
That's right. So you've got to learn how to brace that position.
Yeah.
And that's the trick. It's like, it's accepting, you know, the challenge of the lift for what it is, not sort of being overly afraid of like, oh, deadlifts are dangerous, you can't round your back. That's not really true. I mean, there's degrees of flexion, like in a literal sense. If you flex forward a couple degrees, that's different than 4, 5, 6 degrees at any vertebrae. The loading increases dramatically as you get, into kind of a deeper flexion. And so let's say, for example, you've got 5 lumbar vertebrae and you round your whole lumbar spine forward by 15 degrees. If you do 3 degrees at each joint, that's pretty good. But if you do like 7 or 8 degrees at one joint uncontrollably, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
We're at best, it's just unsustainable to like train that way because you're loading too much pressure on one spot. So that's where I think the best lifters, you can distribute the load on your spine. Your lats are also kind of pivotal for distributing the load on your spine. Your lats kind of fan out. They go from your arm, which is loaded by the weight, across pretty far up the thoracic, and they go all the way down to your pelvis. Not the muscle, but the fascia. So your lats are kind of like, if you see one of those like suspension bridges with all the cables hanging down, your lats are the cables. They're distributing the load on each one of your vertebrae. So if they're weak, you're not distributing the load efficiently. You're just hoping for the best.
So when you set it up, how do you go about getting in that position, but then getting everything tight before you pull?
Yeah, what I would sort of say is getting in the position, you should look like your armpit is directly above the bar. That's the position that you should be lifting from, not behind the bar.
Yeah.
Not further over the bar. When the lift starts, I think there's a number of ways to think of it. Some people will think of kind of leg pressing the floor. Some people will think of kind of sitting and standing. I don't think there's one way that's the only way to do that. But I think there is a certain timing that has to be balanced with your aggression. Like you literally cannot rip the bar off the floor so hard that you're already locked out. Like that's not, we think that way, but that's not possible. So if you can, and really the main thing that I think about as far as the bracing is taking my breath and really just flexing the abs. For me, it's the lower abs more. Just in my own personal experience, I tend to overarch the lower back. But I think the key is repetition. If you do the reps, normally when you do reps, if you execute the form well, you should be able to do one, set it down, and then get into the correct lifting position more immediately on the subsequent rep, and maybe even more aggressively as you kind of build up fatigue. So if you use the right kind of weights to do volume, you should build efficiency as you go. Be like any other sport. If you went to the basketball court and you shot 5 free throws, you would hope that you would get better as you go by practicing, not worse because you're too tired.
Well, isn't the second rep going to put you in a better position than the first? So, which would bring up the question of how many times that's not going to be the reality of a meet where you only have the one.
Sure. I would say a better position, not because, when I do reps, I never do touch and go reps for deadlifts. So it's not literally putting you in a better position, but from a CNS standpoint, your body knows what position got the weight off the floor.
Yeah. So
you can get into that position immediately as opposed to like having to feel it out. And then on a third rep, if you start to feel fatigue, you're like, I could lift this again, but I'm wasting time by moving slower. So you can optimize your sort of like your speed as you go into these reps. So that's for building volume. And I think volume builds your strength. Yeah, of course you need to do some heavy lifting so you're, geared up to do well on the first rep, because powerlifting is a 1 rep sport. But using volume has been like a huge game changer for me. I always did sets of reps, but to be able to kind of pull back and do workouts with like a top set of deadlifts and then sort of like a volume block of deadlifts behind that, I found that to be extremely important. And as far as being able to brace in sort of the unique sort of conformity or the conformed position of your spine that I think, each person has to figure out for themselves, doing the deadlifts is kind of tough to replace. So, doing a bunch of back extensions does not teach you how to position your back. It just strengthens the muscles. So I've always relied on doing a lot of stiff leg deadlifts and good mornings for kind of back strength. And I kind of mimic some of that rounding when I do those, but to actually do a lot of sumo deadlifts or actually do a lot of conventional deadlifts where your back is having to deal with that rounded position, I feel like that's kind of tough to replace.
How has your training then changed to how you train now?
I'd say the biggest thing is now I will do a top set of deadlifts, and that could be like a single, a triple, a set of 5. And then I will follow that with sort of a working weight where I'll do multiple sets of, like 4 or 5, 6 reps, something like that. And I'm building, 15, 20, 25 reps in a workout. I find that to be extremely productive. When I switched to training conventional, I did a training block where, and for conventional, every time I would go to max, I would get so amped up that I would pull and like really extend my back, and that would just ruin the form. So when I finally learned how to kind of cue myself to like lift and then let my head drop just slightly to kind of release some of that extension on the upper back, I would do it fine on normal reps. But when I got to the max, I'd always get kind of overamped and couldn't execute it. So that was good. But I also started doing a lot of pause deadlifts. And I think we did talk about this the last time I was here. But the pause deadlifts were really, really instrumental for me in building my conventional strength. And they work really well for sumo. I do them a little bit differently. For conventional, I will lift to the kind of upper shin and then pause there. And I'll pause for at least 3 seconds, like very long 3 seconds, not like you can't rush or you're kind of undermining the hypertrophy effect, I think. And at the same time, I would allow the bar to kind of settle. So you're sort of seeing like, can I let 10% of the tension off and let just my erectors hold the weight, and then I would always pull explosively from that paused position. So that was just really good at just hammering the lower back. And, if you do 5 sets of 5 with a 3-second pause, you're having 75 seconds of tension, time under tension, just in that position where you're right below the knees, which is kind of like the toughest part, in most people's, or the part where you're forced to hold the weight in front of your knees. So it's the furthest away from your hips. For sumo, however, I would always pause just as the bar is breaking off the floor. Because I think in sumo, getting that perfect position at the start is like, you can't compensate for that. So to be able to just wedge your hips into place to the point where the bar breaks the floor by an inch, hold it there for me, just for 1 second on sumo, because it's not a question of like erector strength. It's more of a question of just getting the hips to wedge. So 1 second pause and then explosive from there. But I use them on both, and very, very, very effective for building form, and also very effective for building strength when you're able to repeat the motion like over and over and over again.
Has your squat had to change over the past?
My squats changed from injury, I would say.
Yeah.
I have a hip impingement, and over the years, it has become more and more impossible to kind of like internally rotate my right hip. So I basically just narrowed my stance. I still kind of keep the knees wide, but my feet are closer. They're probably more like shoulder width now. And just kind of sidesteps the problem for now. A little more quad involvement to squat closer, maybe a little more lower back involvement than, getting to use the hips more. But I mean, it's kind of a fine price to pay to kind of lift, the next like, decade or so.
And then your bench training, is it relatively still the same?
I don't train bench as frequently now. Had like a pinched nerve in my neck that kind of sidetracked my tricep strength a lot. And it, I'll do it when I feel like it, but for the most part, my training schedule is pretty limited. So I just use the time to train more squats and deads and just a little bit of bench here and there. But my squat and deadlift feel like they're as strong as ever. And so I'm just like, it's more fun.
Yeah.
Not not really as driven with the bench. It's just there's kind of like a limit to what I'm able to handle with my left tricep. So
has it been getting better?
No, it got better for a while, and it's really not like a kind of like a muscular issue. So at one point it basically caused me to kind of strain my shoulder, because it's just like, I'm trying to change the loading pattern. So that was a little bit frustrating. I have some sort of thoughts of what I can do about it, but I'm not really acting on those right now. So it's just not really part of what I'm doing in the training that much right now.
So how do you periodize the training over the year then?
Right now, I have been, in the last year, I've probably had 2 times where I did not train for several months. And then, 2 stretches where I've trained for like several months also. So right now I've been training for probably like 4 months, and I'm really just training about twice a week. This is really more to do with like the constraints on my schedule. And whenever I train, I'm, doing some combination of squats and deadlifts, or squats and like, quad training, or squats and some back training. And that's been pretty enjoyable. I feel like my ability to hit an all-time best in the squat is there. And like last May or April, I squatted 804 with the safety bar. And that was like a pretty big, 1 rep max PR, like I think 15 kilogram higher than I'd done. Yeah, and the deadlifts, they feel like if I wanted to peak those and test out where I'm at, I probably could make a PR with that. So for now, I'm not looking at a certain meet, but I'm like lifting in the animal cage this weekend. So I'm gonna do some reps with the safety bar squat, which is, it's kind of like right up my alley. It's just kind of like how I like to train a lot of times.
Doesn't part of this make you think that maybe you need to take a couple months and just not train at all?
Well, I've done that.
I know, but many times you find these fucked up correlations. Maybe it's a correlation, maybe it's causation. Who knows? That time away allows you to get stronger when you come back. Yeah. But when everything's going well, the meathead doesn't want to take the time away.
It's definitely tough to take time away when you're training. One thing I've definitely learned over time is like when I've had to take time off, either for injuries or other things, I'm always able to gain my strength back. And like I said earlier, it gives you the chance to like kind of go back to the drawing board and sort of make sure that you like what you're doing in your training, you like how your technique looks on all the lifts, or maybe you just want to kind of do like a different focus. One of the things that I think is really underutilized is doing something other than like the competition lift as the main sort of focus of a training block. For example, you always low bar squat. And so you're like, maybe I'm going to use the safety squat bar, and that's going to be the primary focus of my squatting for the next like 6 to 8 weeks or something. It's obvious you could do that with like, your sumo deadlifter. I'm going to do conventional for a big block. But I think those kind of things are underutilized. I think on the bench, it's fairly easy because I've always liked having sort of a main day where I'm doing the regular bench. But then I also, if your secondary day is like, let's say on the secondary day, you say, I want to focus on, and you have to pick kind of the chest, the shoulders, or the triceps. Well, whatever you pick as your first exercise of the day, you pick one that, it doesn't really matter what you sort of ascribe it to. But if you say, okay, well, the next 6 weeks, I'm going to do my second day. It's always going to start with incline bench. And then I'm going to always, do like a shit ton of dips or something. And then, 6 weeks later, you're like, all right, now I'm going to always do shoulder presses and close grip bench. So you can sort of, I feel like on the bench, it's easier to kind of, there's more options.
Yeah.
So it's easier to kind of pick one thing to like say, okay, I really want to get my flat dumbbell bench up. So that's going to be the first exercise of a certain day of my training. I'm not going to do it after bench when it's kind of like, maybe good, maybe bad. I'm going to do it as its own thing and then see what happens. You might make a lot of progress that carries over to your main lift when you give your main lift sort of a backseat.
I think it
also gives you a mental refresher.
Yeah.
When you're just like not constantly stressing about like pushing your main lift up. And then what if you have a bad day? You're kind of like, oh man, all this work and I'm just backsliding.
Well, it also helps, speaking as a washed up meathead, it also helps because when you do this your whole life and say you try to do some stupid shit like bodybuilding training or all this other stuff that you don't really like, training becomes really boring.
Sure.
Because you're really not training for anything. So then you can just pick some stupid variation like a high box spider bar and say, I want to do X amount of weight on this, but you can't do it now.
Yeah.
But it's going to take, if not more, it might take 9 months because I got to get back in shape. There's all these other phases. Then you have an anchor point, where as lifters, that's kind of what we all grow up with. There's this anchor point of
squat
test. Yeah, but it doesn't always have to be those lifts.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, if it could be something that's going to complement those lifts, then you get a mental break, you get all these other things. And if you end up not being able to do one of the lifts for whatever injury, whatever it's going to be for the rest of your life, then what are you going to do? Train for health? You know,